Guru Nation, welcome to another episode of Random Musings from the Clinical Trials Guru. Very special guest from Deep 6 AI. It's such a cool name. We got Wout. And can you say your last name, please?
Yeah, sure. Wout Crystallize.
Okay, and we got Wout and then Chris, the co-host here. So we're going to talk about AI. We're going to talk about the future of clinical research because ever since probably the last few years, we've been going to conferences, DIA, Bio. I'm sure you go to way more conferences than we do.
I hope not, but yeah.
I'm sure you do. The talk is all about AI, about big data, about analytics. I mean, that's all they're talking about, virtual trials. That's clearly the future of the industry. So it's important for Guru Nation and everyone watching and listening to kind of understand the macro concepts. Right, and then we can get really deep into it, but I think we should start from a macro level just to understand, okay, what does this actually mean? Getting the EHRs and then putting AI on top of it. And what does this actually mean for clinical research? How is this a game changer? Is AI a gimmick? Because a lot of people think it's a gimmick, right? So there's a lot we can talk about here with the future of clinical trials, especially with AI, with what Wout's company is doing with Deep 6 AI. But before we get into that, can we just talk about you and your background and how did you actually get started in research?
Yeah, I mean, your first question is already going to unmask my lack of deep experience in clinical trials because I came to it late, as you may know. So I started my career as a diplomat in the Middle East, having nothing to do with clinical trials at the time. Then joined a consulting firm called McKinsey & Company in Asia, based out of Singapore, but traveled around all of Asia. Then I started an extreme sports company, which is...
Extreme sports, no kidding.
Yeah, completely different. I mean, it gave occasion to some medical emergencies that could have benefited from clinical trials, but it's about as close as I was at that time. And then after some other perambulations, came to LA, started working, believe it or not, with the US intelligence community, using AI specifically on different types of data, mostly unstructured, to find patterns and other things.
With US intelligence?
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
So we're talking CIA, FBI, that kind of stuff?
Exactly, those kind of players. But realizing that I wanted to better with my life and I wanted to be on the good side of things, and we felt like the technology, the capabilities we were building, the AI that we were developing would be really, really good for healthcare. Especially with all the digitization of medical records, the whole drive. I think at the time when we were looking into this was 2016, the US alone had spent $70 billion on digitizing medical records. And we saw at the time that there was a massive amount of big data now, right? You had all of these medical records, they're all being put together, so you think, oh, this is amazing. I can take a record from one patient who comes to see me, and I can basically benchmark that patient against 5 million other patients like that to see, like, what is the right diagnosis, what is the right prognosis, what type of treatment should I pick? So we thought this is gonna be amazing. What you actually saw after all of those EMRs, right, going online and going live, is that there's no real big data. What you had was massive amounts of little data, locked and fragmented in each individual patient record and each individual Cerner, Epic, and other instance, but they don't talk to each other. And one of the reasons why they don't talk to each other is that most of the salient clinical information in a patient record is unstructured. Right? It's the data that a physician writes down when they meet with you. When you go see a physician, they don't want to kind of say, hold on, I'm looking for your name field, and I type in the name, and I'm looking for the symptom, type in the symptom. There's still somewhat of a conversation going, like, hey Dan, and tell me about what's going on. They do type, which is maybe a little bit annoying, but at least there is that context.
I've noticed that when I go to my doctor too, it's the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely right, we all see that. So, but while they're typing, they're basically entering data about you and what's wrong with you and what's right with you, etc., all in text fields. Now the problem is that regular software cannot really do much with those text fields. It doesn't really know what's in there, it cannot understand that. Because traditional software, say non-AI driven software, they look at labeled fields. It can work like an Excel spreadsheet. If you put, say, Lincoln in a cell in an Excel spreadsheet, and your software or Excel doesn't know what Lincoln means. If you put above that, this is a president, or this is a last name, or this is a car brand, right? Oh, now it knows what it's talking about.
So it can sort the information.
Exactly. So what we were thinking we could bring to healthcare, right, and why we made the move is that we have the ability of making sense of all of that unstructured data. We kind of know what Lincoln means without needing to see a label. And in healthcare, obviously, if we look at all of that unstructured data, which is roughly 80% of all clinical data, making sense of all of that really in-depth granular information.
Unstructured data.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a key term for Guru Nation.
Absolutely, absolutely. You'll hear more and more about that. I mean, it's one of the foundational problems of digital information in healthcare.
So can your software decipher everything? I mean, is there anything that it stumbles on? When the doctor
Yes.
writes his summary notes on the patient, it can decipher everything you were about to say. Yes.
Yes,
that's
to some
problems.
extent. What we don't do OCR. So if it's digital, if it's in a format where we can read it, where we know what the text says, we can do. If there's a clinical record that say was a fax from a physician, and a patient walks in with the fax, it says here it is, right? And they scan it, they take it as a picture. We're not going to look at the picture. So we will look at the words that make up the text.
Right.
But if it's like an ugly fax or something with smears, and the OCR or the optical character recognition doesn't work, then there's not much we can do with it.
So it has to be a format that's acceptable
Yep.
and legible.
So any information that is digitally native, right? So basically it says like it's entered in a digital format, it goes straight into the record, we can take.
Okay.
Or information that is going through an OCR process and can be scanned and recognized, like a rich text file, we can deal with.
Okay, fair enough.
So how does this help us understand the big picture? And then we'll dive deeper into Deep 6 AI. Big picture for clinical research. Obviously, first thing that comes to mind is theoretically, sponsors could find patients, or sponsors could find the sites that have the patients they need quickly,
Yep.
right? Is that like the lowest hanging fruit that we're...
It depends, right? I mean, we all know that finding patients for trials is a huge bottleneck. As I mean,
It's the
every
biggest
year,
one.
yeah, exactly. Like you said, that's why you guys exist, right? That's why
Yeah, that's right.
you have a massive following of billions of users worldwide. It's the fact
Billions,
that
I hope.
working on it, like just like we are, right? The same thing. But it's the biggest problem. Every year in the US alone, we're trying to recruit up to 7 million patients onto clinical trial. I think the last number that we saw, we managed to get about 2.2, 2.3 million patients on the trial. So the gap is massive, right?
So we need 7 million a year on average, and we're
Yeah.
only getting 2 to 3 million a year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, far less than 3 still, exactly. And that's only from studies that are being published on clinicaltrials.gov, etc. So these are studies that are live. There's other studies that don't even make it there because
That's right.
they just know they cannot find the
Either
patients.
non-compliance from the sponsors for not posting it on a clinical trial, which is a
Yep.
lot,
Yeah,
right? So that number's probably even, or that gap's probably even bigger.
yeah. Or they're non-industry sponsored, right? Or non-government sponsored, they don't even make it out there, so absolutely.
Yeah.
But the big thing, because you're talking about the big picture, with precision medicine, right, with the ability to start developing drugs that are specific to patients, the complexity of clinical trials has also gone up. If you're doing a clinical trial for, say, aspirin, and you think it's going to work for everybody, you don't need to be that selective as to who comes into the trial. If you're really developing a drug that is very specifically made for patients with this genomic mutation and with these phenotypic expressions of that, and with these kind of therapies that they've already had and that failed, etc., you're really limiting the pool, and you're putting a lot of effort into all the criteria that a patient has to meet. You guys probably noticed, like, the average number of clinical trials criteria has more than tripled in the last 15 years.
That's right.
Yeah, much more difficult now.
Yeah.
Way more complex. I started in 2005, and they were much simpler than they are now. The average study back then, much simpler than they are now.
Yeah.
And that's because we're getting into the age of personalized medicine, which is, I mean, we're already seeing clinical trials made for one patient.
Yeah.
So this AI plays right into this kind of trend.
Absolutely, absolutely. So where AI helps here is that if now you're looking not at, say, 5 to 7 criteria, but you're looking at 20 or 30 or 50 criteria, right? That is a lot of work for any human being to go through it, look through the records. People start to spend hours just on finding a single patient. AI can do all of that in milliseconds,
Hours,
right?
days, weeks.
But you know
Yeah.
the problem, like the technology is just one aspect, because the problem with that is just identifying the patients.
Mhm.
But you will never be able to substitute humans, because see, what the humans I think in the future are going to be really good for is convincing the patients to do the study,
Mhm.
raising awareness,
Oh, yeah.
because AI is not going to be able to do that. AI can identify, okay, this site has 75 patients that could qualify potentially.
Yeah.
But somebody needs to talk to those people, because chances are those 75 patients never heard of a clinical trial, or if they have, they think they're going to be a guinea pig.
So,
Right, so that's a bigger
Yeah.
problem. This is the initial step, but then after that, you need like a human element of awareness.
and I would agree with this, but I think we're nearing the point where the the software can email that patient, right? And then the patient responds with questions, and the software then can answer those questions. I think
You
we're very
could.
close to that point.
You could go to the chatbot approach, right? But I think Dan is also right in that today a lot of CRCs and CRAs doing a lot of grunt work, right? And grunt work where you have to go into records and go through all of these things and to try and find a patient. That is silly work. What you want them to do is say, like, instead of spending time going through records, have the AI do that, have the software do that, have them
Instead of
find all the
identifying.
patients.
Sure, just pick,
And then-
put in the criteria that's necessary to
Yeah.
search through.
Because I remember when I was pre-screening back in the day, that's right, the hardest part. I mean, I would go to a hospital with this PI, and he would say, okay, here's a stack of records, go through all of them, which was 80% of my time, and now contact them, which
Yep.
was 20%, right? But that, if you can eliminate that 80%, you can theoretically contact more patients.
Absolutely. Let the AI do the stupid work, right? And reserve the time of your screeners, of your CRCs, etc., to build those relationships, to be able to go deeper instead of spending 20 hours a week actually going through
Yeah.
records and maybe 5 hours a week actually talking to people. Spend 20 hours talking to people, getting to know them, build that relationship,
Yeah.
explain them how clinical trials work, where the benefit is for them, where the benefit is for science and medicine as a whole, and do that and have the AI actually give you the patients where you used to spend weeks on finding patients, have that done in minutes.
Yeah, see, the AI emailing patients, I don't think would work. Patients
It would work for a few.
You would need like a clinician or somebody
Sure.
from that
You
clinic.
need that
who knows the
personal
patient.
touch.
The personal touch. But another thing I'm excited about AI is retrospective and prospective studies,
Mhm.
right? Because that, you can get an easy opt-in from a patient. Maybe you can get you can get one by default that says we
From
can
the IRB.
do retrospective chart review. So now you can run studies from from all the past data.
Absolutely.
And extrapolate out into the future, or maybe in real time as they come in to their regular office visits, you're collecting small amounts of data. So that's powerful. I think that increases the overall market share and maybe makes for more successful studies,
Yeah,
at least in theory.
New version of real world study.
Yeah, a new version of a real world study, exactly. So what do you think, Wout, about virtual trials?
No, I think it's a great step, right? And it's a natural step. I mean, as patients become more informed and become more independent and more like agents of their own health and of what they do, it's only natural that you actually engage with them directly and make them more independent as well. Giving them the tools to actually interact with the protocols, with the CRCs, with the sponsors, with the site administrators, I think is a great step forward. It also releases the burden on some of the other people as well.
It does. We were talking about a budget the other day for a virtual trial. Not very
Yeah,
good compared
yeah.
to regular
Yeah.
study for the sites. But I think that the pie is getting bigger.
Sure.
The market share is getting bigger, and virtual trials are studies that would have never been possible before. So I don't think they're replacing traditional trials.
No,
I think
not
they're
at
actually
this
enhancing
point.
them.
Not at this point.
Not at this
Down the
point.
road.
Who knows?
Possible.
Who knows down
Sure.
the road?
If you're doing like in a complex immunotherapy oncology trial or something, you cannot really do that in a virtual setting, right? You have the patient come in, and especially if you do like CAR T cell or whatever, those are high complex trial with a high human touch. But if there's other stuff like diabetes stuff or more longitudinal things, then you can have patients
Sure.
come in remotely. So I agree, just it's expanding the number of tools that you have available.
Right.
What do you think the role, and I don't know how much you interact with CRAs or CRCs on a daily basis, but what do you think the role of a CRA will be, let's say in 10 years, at the rate we're going right now with AI and all these things that you guys are doing?
I think it depends actually. I think you'll see two things. One, a CRA will have a lot of the tasks that he or she is doing today, see a lot of them pushed to software and have them be automated. At the same time, a lot of tasks are being done by PIs today, right? And are being done by sponsors will be pushed to the CRA. So I think if anything, you'll see an upgrading of that function. You'll actually see more autonomy and the ability to use software and data to make informed decisions without having to push it up to the level of a PI or somebody else. So I believe it's an exciting time in a way actually for them to work with that. It may change some of the requirements. People will need to get trained on software, need to actually become more in-depth, but I think software and AI can guide and make certain decisions based on subject matter expertise, either about, say, the drug and the environment, or the patient, or the data, or the protocol.
And you guys are gaining a lot of market share lately, and congrats on raising the round from
Thank you.
VC. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so late last year, I think it was September or something, October, we closed a $17 million Series A, which was quite a big round for us and in general. But it was a good validation, I think, of the importance of clinical trials and the fact that it's almost becoming like a standalone sector, right? Clinical trial optimization, clinical trial acceleration, as we call it, is becoming like a viable niche industry.
Right.
When we started doing this in 2016, we had to explain our case to everybody, to health systems, even to pharma, right, to investors, like they didn't know about it. Last year when we were raising our money, I had investors reach out to me and says, hey, Wout, do you have time? I would like to share my thesis about clinical trial software with you. Like, okay, sure. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
And so your ideal client, correct me if I'm wrong, is like a big university system or a big medical system. Because I can see the value for them. They have thousands of patients in their EMRs.
That
But
used to be the case.
Used to be the case.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is it now?
So now I'd say we have different tiers of clients that we actually support. On the one hand, you still have the big AMCs, the academic medical centers, and like you said, they have a lot of infrastructure, they're doing things at scale, so they just want to have software so they can do this more productively, faster, better, right? And they can also see the benefits of their work. What we started doing though in, I think the last 6 or 7 months, we put our software on a platform that is also scalable and is like a lower cost entry point, because if we take in data, right, and say an Amazon cloud or an Azure cloud or something else, and we have it be hosted by the site or by the group, it requires a little bit of technological savvy, and there's some cost associated with it. So we're able to bring that cost down, so now we can also actually work with more of the community settings and the smaller clinics and the smaller sites,
Like
and also
smaller
site networks. Yeah.
Site networks, I was just gonna say that. Site networks is like an ideal target for
Absolutely.
them, right?
Absolutely.
And the power in the future is gonna be all in your analytics and your data, right? What do you think about this? Because we had to talk with somebody recently about this, about site networks and how they can extract value from their site networks by having access to that data. The problem is a lot of these sites do not have access to their own EMRs,
Yeah,
right? Like they don't have access to their own EMRs.
right.
So what do you think about this? Because we have a lot of sites in our network that have a hard time getting a hold of their doctors' EMRs. So what can we do for those sites? Because it's one thing for them to want to use your company, but then now they have to convince their physician, hey, here's the value. So what's the pitch they can give to the...
I think the key thing is, and that's kind of a big shift, right, is that clinical research has always been seen as some kind of a loss leader. Companies engage in it and they deal with it because they feel it's important for the reputation, institutional knowledge, ties with industries, but it's acceptable to kind of lose money in the end. Now with new software and with the new drive actually and the proliferation of all of these new therapies and precision medicine, that mindset is changing. And people are starting to really see this as an ROI positive effort. And I think that if you can actually get that thinking, not just actually at the level of big AMCs or at the site networks themselves, but also at the physicians that participate in it. If you can tell them like, look, we're all doing this together. If we can connect around one shared data platform where everybody can actually work as a site sponsor, right, as a site itself, as a physician who's contributing patients, right, as a patient directly eventually, if we all work on this one common platform, we share our data, we can also share the proceeds across everybody. So everybody can kind of share in that ROI that we're generating. And we're seeing that message resonate really, really well.
So I guess it's all about communicating that value to the sites. What do you think, Chris?
I have a lot of thoughts. So,
There's a lot of pushback from sites on this.
well, not only that, I'm more from the HIPAA perspective. A lot of people are paranoid about their data, right, and where it's going and how it's going to be used. And I mean, I'm sure you're de-identifying all the data, right? You're not providing this data to the sponsor with who's this person.
We're not, but we actually take it a step further. We don't own any data. So our role is of a neutral software provider, and what we really do is we build an ecosystem where the people who own the data can connect on our software, where the people actually value that data for their clinical trials, but the ownership never changes hands. So even if we're talking to a small physician, they retain ownership of all the data. We set them up in the cloud that they can own, right, or in a software system that they can actually house themselves if they want to, and we enable them with our software to connect and report back to pharma. But clinical data or patient data never leaves their environment.
So they can deny your access at some point if they chose.
We don't even need access from our side indeed, but if they want to stop the software, yeah, all they say is like stop, and they pull the plug on the cloud and it's done.
Okay.
we're only a software provider. We're not a data owner. We're not a service provider. We don't actually take somebody's data and use it to find patients for others. We say like, here's the data, right? You can use our software to create value on your data and share it with a sponsor or share it with a CRO or share it with a site network to work together.
Okay, so explain that again. So you're a software provider, not a service provider.
Absolutely.
Can you explain the difference?
Sure. So typically you have CROs or you have site networks or you have vendors that will say, I'm going to use your data and I'm going to get access to all your data. I'm going to browse through all of your patients. I'm going to find the patients. And as a service, I'm going to share that with the sponsor or with you and you can sell that. We don't do any of that.
Okay.
What we really say is that we give you software that is a self-service tool. So you use our software or it runs automatically on your data, right? And you will then get the benefits of finding patients and you can share that back with sponsors, CROs, site networks, but it's all on your side. We're enabling you as
So
a
the
data
site
owner.
is the one sharing.
Yeah.
You're basically empowering the sites to be a service provider.
Absolutely.
Or a better service provider.
Absolutely.
I understand. And so you're monetizing from the actual sites based on the software sales, not from sponsors.
Well, they can certainly monetize sponsors as well.
I know,
Right? They can
yeah.
act like, I don't know if I can say this, but they can act like a Curian in a roundabout way, right?
Like a patient recruiter vendor?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We can, right? Our goal is we will give you our software, we will charge for the software because you can make 10x or 100 times what you pay for the software or even 1,000 times depending on your scale and how well you use it, right? So we will take a small fee there and we can take a transaction fee for the value that we generate. So our step-in price can be really low because as we generate value for you, right, we can take part of that value.
Do you see the value in like a very small sites using this?
I think there could be value, but I think there would be more value if they actually come together. I think the best value is if they act like a network.
Like part of a network.
Exactly. And we're seeing that already. We're seeing like some creative people who say, I'm investing in a site, I'm buying data rights, or I'm buying 51% or something of the site, only to actually build scale, get these sites together, and make them attractive as a destination site for pharma.
Well, Curian, their route of charging sites individually is.
We're giving them a lot of shout outs.
Yeah,
Maybe not a
well,
good way.
Well, this is going to be bad for them, but.
It doesn't matter.
They charge something like, what was it? We talked to them a long time ago. It's like $5,000 for a
Ridiculous
screening,
amount.
even if they don't,
Yeah.
even if they don't enter the study. So the way that you could, I don't know if this is worthwhile, but individually approach sites would be per randomized patient, right? Because your data should show these patients all qualify, right? So you shouldn't be at risk for many screen failures, I would imagine. I just don't know if there's I know a lot of sites would be willing to pay for that.
That's exactly one of the things we do is we reduce the number of screen fails because you have access to
Right.
so much more data, including the unstructured
Right.
data that has a lot of the actual clinical performance of a patient, etc. But the thing for us is more, as a company, to set up at a small site, right, there's a cost for us in terms of acquiring the client and
right.
setting up and doing all of the connectivity of the data. Doing that for one single patient and say $500.
No, you
The
could charge
economies are
more
not
than
there.
500,
Yeah.
but I don't know if it'd be worthwhile for you. For like 3 randomized patients charging 5,000 apiece, I don't know if
No, I
there's any
think
value
the,
there.
I think the
for you.
values in the AMCs and the site networks
Sure.
and the bigger sites.
Of course.
There is value once you say, I'm doing this seriously, right? Once a site says, like, I don't want to do this on a one-off and send one patient a year or something to a study, but once I'm saying, I'm sending, I think if I use the software well and I use this to mine my patients, make myself attractive so sponsors can see that I'm a viable site and
Right.
they know that I'm doing this and I
Right.
know that I have fast startup times and they can see that I have patients, I can share my feasibility results with them, right? Once you say, I'm expecting to do at least $100,000 a year or something from patients, then we are definitely an accelerator and we can actually build and give you the capabilities to do this.
Sure.
I
And
think
then we
it's
can
very
take parts of
important
that.
what you mentioned about the fact that you're a software provider, not a service provider, because it's important for sites to differentiate between, because right now with virtual trial, there's a lot of scams going on. I mean, you go to any conference, you'll run into them if you actually talk to them long enough. Okay, so they own the data, those companies. Like they're doing studies to get in the back door of the sites or of the clinics, scan all the EMRs, right? And I know a lot of big CROs are actually funding some of these startups. You probably know who they are too. Those we're not going to mention their names, but
Right.
we don't want problems. But so it's important to differentiate if you're a site, because if you have a bad taste from an experience with one of these vendors, they're going to look at you, Deep 6 AI, and think you're the same thing.
They
So I
might.
think that's like one of your most one of the most important things you can communicate to sites is, we don't own the data, we don't want your data, we don't want to scan your data, we're doing that to help you, we're not touching that, we're software. We're
Exactly.
not service provider, because there's a lot of misinformation and everything's just being grouped into virtual trials.
Mhm.
So it's like, all right, virtual trials, now it's going to start triggering scams and red flags in
Mhm.
people's heads.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And that's why from day one we thought about what is this landscape going to look like in the future, right?
Yeah.
And we always felt that data is so important. Everybody from a big AMC to a small clinic, right, to an individual physician will start seeing the value of my data is too important to just give it away.
Exactly right. What PI we know got approached by one of these companies at a conference. They offered her, they came like they were a sponsor of a study. They said, we have a virtual trial, do you want to join? She said, sure, I like to be on the cutting edge of things. They wanted to pay her $3,000 to scan in perpetuity all of their EMRs. And then she's like, okay, where's the study? And I said, oh, we're doing the studies retrospective, prospective. Don't worry about that, here's your money.
Yeah.
All right, this is a scam, right?
It is a scam, right? It's completely undervaluing. It's kind of giving somebody a nickel and a dime for the data. It's almost
For
robbery.
people who don't know any better.
Yeah,
And they're
exactly.
using the trend virtual trials to do this.
Yeah. It's honestly, it's robbery. They know that the value of the data is way, way higher than what they're paying for, and they're abusing the knowledge differential there, right?
Mm.
So we were maybe too radically candid from day one, saying like, your value is really in the data that you have.
Yeah.
So don't give it away, don't give it to us, right? We will give you software so you can realize the value yourself, and you can use our software to get 10x or 100x the value out of that.
That makes a lot more sense to me.
I would agree.
I mean-
Absolutely agree.
And this stuff is so new. I mean, even people like us who look and read these stories, like in our spare time, we're confused. So
Mhm.
you can imagine like the mom and pop research site
Oh,
across
yeah.
the street that's got their head in their files and not even looking at this stuff.
Or a physician, right, that's working 80 hours a week
Yeah.
and they're seeing 30 patients and
Yeah.
consulting. They don't have time to stay up on this and to see.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
And they hear virtual trials, they think it's good, then one of these companies comes and scans all their data, and pretty soon they're like, well, where's the study? What are we doing?
Yeah.
Well, somebody else owns your data now, right?
Yeah, I know that's terrible. We're in this for the long game, right? So we're not trying to do a quick grab or something of data or anything else. That wouldn't serve us well. We try to make every transaction and every relationship we have win-win.
Mhm.
Everybody who works with us is not just a client, they're a partner, they're a relationship. And we want to make sure that they see the value in what they're getting out of us. And we can actually tell them, we're giving you software so you can become this kind of an agent that can attract more sales. You can become your own mini super site. There's a lot of value you can get out of it. If today you're only treating patients, if you now start actually bringing them onto trials, this can become 80% of your revenues going forward.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what examples are showing. I was blown away by that as well.
This is a lot. I mean, you have any other questions?
No, but that's great. We tell clients this all the time.
But you see
right?
how, like,
There's lots
under-
of money to be made in
Yeah.
research.
And
Yeah.
and the data these sites have, they don't really understand how much value is in their data.
Right.
Especially the sites that have a hybrid private practice and research. Because there's a lot of sites that are just standalone research clinics, right? So they have to build up their own database. They don't even have the EMRs. They just have printed copies of what they need from whoever the healthcare provider is.
Yeah.
So, but for the sites that actually have EMRs inside and have research there, I think there's tremendous value in what they have.
Mhm.
Yep, that's what we think.
Interesting. Well, I'm glad you were able to differentiate software provider versus service provider. I think that's how you should approach it, because there's these companies out there, they're muddying the waters.
Absolutely, that's what we do.
And
We
you
say
don't want to fall under that category.
we're a
just by
digital health
default.
company. Exactly, we're a digital health company. We're a software as a service provider, right? It's all about the software. Exactly.
Very good. Wow, I appreciate it. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do that?
Probably go to our website, deep6.ai. So it's DEEP, the number 6.ai. And they can find more information there. They can ask for a demo. They can ask to talk to our charming team and our tall BDRs who can set up a meeting with
Matt?
Tall.
me.
Tall.
Exactly.
Well,
Super tall. So what does Deep Six actually mean?
Deep Six, it's a good question actually. We started a name while we were still in the intelligence community, and it's based on a nautical or a merchant marine term. It used to be that if you have like a ship, sailboat or something, right, that was carrying cargo from one place to the other, if some cargo would fall overboard in the water, once it would sink below 6 fathoms of depth, like a metric of depth, it was considered irretrievable. And we said with our software we can retrieve the irretrievable. We can find signal in all the
Very
data
nice.
points.
I like
and
it.
finding.
I think
That's
I've seen a
clever.
movie- I think I've
You
seen
come
a
up with
movie
this?
named Deep Six.
Yeah, kind of on the spot.
You came up with it.
Yeah, we had to do this very quickly. We were awarded a contract, and they were like, so what is your name? Like, and then we did some quick
Deep Six,
brainstorming.
that's awesome.
Exactly.
Good, and I'm excited about the marketing stuff you guys are going to be doing.
Yeah.
I'd love to come by Pasadena to see the
Please do.
headquarters. That's the headquarters, right?
Yep.
And we'll do a part 2. We're just going to follow this trend because let's see what happens with this whole virtual trial, the data. The sites need to understand first that they have power and value in this data before they just give it away to the lowest bidder.
Absolutely.
Or the
Absolutely.
first bidder is what's going on. So yeah, we've got to have a lot more awareness around this topic, and I'll be happy to follow you guys' progression. And see how that
Absolutely.
goes.
We're just getting started. We'll keep you posted.
Thank you very much, Wow.
All right,
Thank you,
thank you.
Chris. Thank you, everyone, for watching, listening.
Thanks.
Catch you later.